Welcome to the Bible Search and Rescue podcast. Bible Search and Rescue is part of the West-Star Institute. My name is Chad Vinters. I'm a West-Star scholar and the host of Bible Search and Rescue. And today we're going to continue our series on Bible Search and Rescue Goes to the Movies. And we have got an awesome guest. I'm here today with writer and all-around awesome human being, Robert Zappia. Robert has a number of writing credits in his background, including Tom and Jerry, ABC Mouse. He did the 2022 film Pray for the Devil. But in particular, we're here to talk with Robert today about his work as the man who wrote the screenplay for Halloween H20. So just as a part of the fun of this, when I was just shy of 18 years old, Halloween H20 came out. I had never seen a Michael Myers film before. I had sort of a budding interest in the idea of serial killers and saw the trailer for it. Jamie Lee Curtis, all right, I'll go check it out. And I was hooked. As soon as I saw Halloween H20, I started watching the Halloween franchise, got really interested in criminology. So in some regards, Robert Zappia may actually be responsible for my entire career. So I probably owe him some royalties. I don't know. We'll have to sort that out later with the legal team. But we are going to discuss today Michael Myers, good and evil, and the evolution of Halloween H20. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Good morning, Chad. I'm doing well. What an intro. I love that.
It
Responsible
is,
for your career.
yeah, it is
Now,
such
if
a pleasure.
if your career was a serial killer, I would not take it as a compliment. But since
No,
you've gone into more Good Samaritan ways, I will take it as a compliment.
very
It's
much so.
interesting to me. I've had a number of people like yourself where H2O was kind of the gateway film into the horror genre, or more specifically, the serial killer genre. And it definitely had an impact on them. The youngest person who ever reached out to me was a fan. He was 13 years old at the
Mhm.
time, and I wasn't sure if that was a wise choice. But I know he's grown. 13 seems a bit young, but he's grown up to be a very good guy. He's a guy. He's a productive member of society.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
yes,
that's great. And one of the great things about this conversation. So in our last podcast, we talked with independent filmmaker Andrew Nihill, who does these indie sort of campy horror films, right? And
okay.
he's a buddy of mine. He does some cool stuff. But we talked about the way that sometimes, especially in the religious world, people sort of buck the horror genre or like the slasher type films as having basically little to no redemptive value. And one
Hmm.
of the things I love about Halloween H20 and examining the Michael Myers story is that it says so much, at least some of them do. It says so much about good and evil, about confronting darkness, about what it is that drives evil, those types of things. But before we jump into just looking at H20, we need to kind of wrestle a little bit with the background of Halloween in and of itself. So I have my Michael Myers figure in the background up there. That's from the original. And
I
when we
see
get to
it.
H20, I've got the H20 Michael Myers here figure. So it's all good stuff. But I want to talk about the original Halloween just to start. In your mind, as you wrestled with this franchise when you were preparing for it, what was the legacy of Halloween for you? What was the message you saw, whether literal or metaphorical?
Well, that's a great question. And speaking of what you said about, in religious circles, usually the horror genre is frowned upon because it does seem like it's majority's kind of putting a spotlight on evil. But from a very young age, and it may be my Catholic upbringing, I went to Catholic elementary and high school.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of good versus evil has always been fascinating to me. And in your intro introduction, you kind of spoke to kind of the diversity of my writing career.
Mm-hmm.
But and hang with me here. It seems odd,
I'm
but
with you.
the common thread, even in a Tom and Jerry to a Halloween, is in essence good versus evil, right? It's
Yeah.
Tom versus Jerry. It's not so much ABC Mouse, which is an educational product. We don't get to explore evil, but we do focus on the good,
Mm-hmm.
which is I'm trying to keep the karma,
Yeah.
keeping the
Balance it.
redemptive balance. In comedy and drama, I've done thrillers, I've done miniseries. Home Improvement was my first writing credit, which was a sitcom on
Hmm.
ABC, which was about relationships and the good and evil of a relationship and man and women and kind of how that plays out. So for me, and I believe like how H2O was your first kind of exposure to this genre, Halloween was for me. Now, when it came out, I did not see it in the theaters because when it came out, I was 10, 9, 10.
Hmm.
But I did see it on TV, I believe is where I first saw it. And it just scared the pants off me. I didn't sleep for days. Everywhere I looked, there was Michael. Every shadow he was coming out of. Thankfully we didn't have clotheslines. We had a dryer, so I didn't have to worry about that. But much of that film for me, he represented in my mind evil in its kind of human form. And I love that because this is a kind of a Christian forward podcast, I can kind of discuss this in ways that I don't normally,
Hmm.
give you a little bit of insight into what's going on in my head, which I wouldn't say to producers necessarily, but like you're saying, what kind of forms these things in my mind. I do believe there's a spiritual battle happening all
Okay.
around us, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that that spiritual battle takes an earthly form in many cases. And in my mind, and of course, I could not articulate this at 12, but I think viscerally, Michael embodied that evil side of the spiritual battle incarnate.
Hmm.
Maybe not a demonic possession, but I mean, Loomis says it perfectly, right? He's got the darkest eyes. The devil's eyes. He's all the speeches he gives. So for me, that legacy of evil was something I wanted to tap into. But some of the I feel like for me, and I know it's very subjective. I think some of the sequels veered too far into the evil side without any redemptive good
Hmm.
quality, good overcoming evil. And the opportunity I had with H2O, which I did not have when I first signed up for it, because Jamie Lee wasn't involved in the very beginning. But the opportunity that presented itself with Jamie Lee that I was excited about was definitively good overcoming evil, at least for
Hmm.
H2O. I
More on that later.
more on that later. But it was great to be able to kind of say, after all this time, 20 years later, it may take a while, but ultimately good triumphs over evil.
Hmm. No, I love that. And, when we talk about, with Westar, we deal a lot with religious matters. We talk about, we have folks who, whether they take scriptures of various kinds, rather literally, metaphorically, whatever it is, the essence of it all is story. And the way that
Mm,
story helps us to wrap our minds around the things we see around us. And so as someone who gets to teach classes on criminology, you're right. There's these aspects of humanity that just make us wonder why, right? Whether it's the real serial killers, you think about a John Wayne Gacy, a Randy Kraft, a Bundy, whoever it is, where it so moves beyond the realm of what we consider to be humanity, that you're just left with these piercing questions. And something that I'll be honest. Whenever we locked down this podcast, I went back and I watched all of them. Went back and watched through all of the original Halloween series, which I know I really need to have my arm twisted to do that. Um, but something that stands out to me about that original. So obviously, one of the key elements to it was it doesn't just jump into slashering by and large, right? Uh,
mm,
a big element of it is the voyeurism. Right. So
mhm,
much of it is rooted in that slow burn voyeurism where he's just watching and watching. And that fateful sense in which the basic reason, at least in the first one, we'll talk about the second one in a second, that he starts to follow Laurie Strode is because she simply dropped off a set of keys at the house because her dad's a realtor. And from there, it starts this chain reaction where his voyeurism leads to this night of carnage. What did you think about how Carpenter's sense of using voyeurism played a role in the development of the film's horror?
Well, that's a great point because at the time when I saw Halloween, I believe Halloween 2 had already come out.
Hmm.
So kind of that reveal of the sister
Hmm.
was already kind of in the zeitgeist. But you're right. When you take Halloween, and I think it's what was so genius about too. I mean, much like why I loved Empire Strikes Back, right? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Spoiler for anyone who doesn't know, 40 years later, that Darth Vader is Luke's son. Like, it was such a mind blowing thing, and kind of equal when you see scrawled on the chalkboard and Halloween 2, sister. When you realize
Yeah.
that, but yes, if we take Halloween just on its own, you're right. I think it's interesting that you take a very young boy, and he's of course wearing the clown mask, and this voyeuristic angle of evil. And in many ways, it's evil watching the innocent. Now, I know some are less innocent than others, right?
Hmm.
Laurie being the most innocent in the film and seemed to be his target. So I think in many ways, again, if you look at it from the lens of good versus evil, and evil kind of the opposite of everything that is good or godly, what's that? There's that whole poem of which I only know off the top of my head the first two lines, which is love is patient, love is kind, right? Well,
Hmm.
evil is patient as well,
Hmm.
and evil is cruel. Like, you could probably go down the line and pervert, that same thing. So I agree. Yes, it was interesting. A lot of it was very voyeuristic kind of uh, lead up to the actual carnage that happens in the night of Halloween. But
Yeah.
but that's what's scary. But that's what's so frightening about it, right? Is
Hmm.
that he's patient. He's just stoic. He is watching his victim. It's like a lion and its prey. But I think even more for me, frightening about Michael is, a lion eventually pounces, or
Hmm.
eventually, like, there's always, like, the jaguar eventually runs, and many of these serial killers, you know, uh, from Scream, and the
Hmm.
various Ghostface, and ultimately they kind of ramp up, right? They're
Yeah.
patient, but then there's a point where you're in a kind of cat and mouse thing, and it's very quick. Michael, it just was he was so confident in that he was going to catch you, and it was very slow, and it was just very look. You can run, doesn't matter to me. I'll eventually catch up to you.
Yeah.
Was always a frightening element of that.
Yeah, something that really stood out rewatching this, now in my 40s, somebody who does, who's now taught history and criminology and some of these fields, the way in which the film is kind of set up as being sort of this little suburban paradise, right? Where
Right.
it's Haddonfield, it's quaint, it's quiet. The sheriff's like, oh, I think you're way off on this, right? Things like this don't happen here. And then, of course, they do. And what's fascinating about that is you watch any number of documentaries on mortifying crimes that happen, especially in small towns. People always say the same thing. Well, things like that didn't happen around here. Well, of course they do,
Hmm.
right? That's the thing, right?
Right.
Is
Yeah.
it's driven by human beings, and wherever humans are, you're going to find evil, right? You're going to find
Yes.
that sense of darkness. And that was one of the things is that there's so much metaphor to this notion of this could be any quiet town, this idea that we've created some little suburban paradise where nothing bad would happen. We're not a Chicago, we're not a New York City, whatever it is. And lo and behold, nope, you're not immune from that, right? It's in a sense, and this will kind of tie into H2O, it's paradise lost, right? That's what it
Mm.
was, is this sense of innocence and paradise is gone, and you just by the end of it, you just have this missing body and all sorts of questions.
Yeah, that's so true. And it was what was so frightening about that original was it could be your town, it could be your city, it could be your suburb, you
Mm-hmm.
know, evil will find you wherever you're at.
Yeah.
There is nowhere safe, and that is a frightening thought.
Yep, absolutely. I do want to say though, I think Dr. Loomis would have more success trying to get his message across if everything wasn't a really dark prophetic monologue about how everyone was doomed, right? So just a little bedside manner goes, oh, hey, I'm a doctor. This guy escaped. But no, everything is he might as well just be banging a staff and preaching repentance. Like,
He's very passionate.
Yeah, pull it back just a bit, Loomis, right, baby? Let's
Yeah.
just try to go stick with the facts. All right, so Halloween Halloween stands out, right? And so in the original, we are left with the impression that he starts this journey of
Yeah.
basically analyzing her because the young girl comes to his door and that's where it launches, right? She just comes there and he starts following her. In number two, we get the big plot twist, right? So number two, and I'm kind of interested in what you thought about the film itself, and I have my own thoughts.
Mm.
But number two, we get the revelation that Laurie Strode is actually Michael Myers' sister. Okay,
Right.
so here's the big reveal, like you said, great comparison, Empire. Do you think this worked well or not for the overall series? I'm kind of curious.
I really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked it because although evil doesn't need a reason, right? There doesn't need to be order or a logic to it. I think for most of us as humans, there's always a motive. It's rarely kind of random, the things we do.
Mm-hmm.
So not that I believe that there aren't random acts of violence or that people do choose people for no reason. Just from a story point of view, that there's some emotional connection, and you could apply as a normal non-evil human being some logic to what his process, even as twisted as it is. Oh, okay, I get it. Oh, okay, he killed his sister that one night. He's put away. He realizes, oh, I have another sister. He's just going after the family. He just gave it some legs or some motivation that I think carried the second film, because once it just becomes random killing for killing's sake, which I think it became out of
Mm-hmm.
necessity because you run out of siblings, and Jamie didn't want to do anymore. Although they did do the
The niece.
in Halloween the niece, so yeah,
Yeah.
you can go down the family tree. He didn't have ancestry at the time, so he had to kind of wing it. But so I liked it. I liked it
Mm.
for those reasons.
Yeah. So in rewatching it, the film itself was, I'll just say it's less than stellar. The overall,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah, it's all taking place in the hospital.
right. Yeah. So the film itself, you're kind of like, there's aspects of it. It's like, ugh. And there were some things like, so the principle of the fate element, right? So there was a focus in the original on fate, right? The whole classroom
Yes,
scene. That's something
yes,
that you reused in
right.
H2O, right? You brought that back full circle in a very lovely way. But the situation of fate. And so then it becomes that it really was more of a matter of fate that his sister, who we don't really know if he knows it's his sister or how he would know it's his sister, but she's the one who walks to the doorstep that day.
Yes,
And it
yes.
launches this whole ring of terror. So there's something there. There were some things about this, like how did Dr. Loomis, Mr. Obsessed with Michael Myers, not know he had a sister who would have been
How do you
like,
miss that?
yeah, like who would have been like 2 years old at the time, where, that the original killings happened. Where did this take place? Right? Like
Yeah,
there was a trial, there was all this stuff. How did he not know that there was this infant sibling there? I digress. There were some holes in there. But if nothing else, like you said, it launches into this whole thing where now it becomes the focus on, oh no, he's got another sister that he wants to axe. So, okay, so we got it. And then at the end, he dramatically burns because, at least my understanding of it, and maybe you can speak to this, is that was the intended end of Michael Myers. They had
correct.
planned that was the end. They were going to start doing new Halloween films that were different formats, like they did with Season of the
Season of the
Witch.
Witch.
Yeah. So do you happen to know, other than just the cash drive, why it is they chose to bring Michael Myers back?
I don't think there is another reason.
Oh, it's just okay, yeah. So they've got
I
something.
honestly don't, because having worked with Mustafa, and this isn't to disparage him, he was an amazing and wise businessman, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it was for any other reason. I mean, as
So,
Season of the Witch came out, there was a lot of disappointed fans. It didn't perform as well. And on its
mhm.
own, like if it wasn't a Halloween film, on its own as a John Carpenter film, it was good. But I
It
think
was.
people were just so like, what? No, Michael, Michael, Michael.
Hmm.
I mean, like releasing a Star Wars movie and just not having any of the, well, of course they're doing that now, but having nothing to do with anything. Um, at the time, people would, riot. So I do think this is from my perspective. Malik Akkad, who's Mustafa's son, might have a completely different answer. But uh, from my lens, I think, in my dealings with Mustafa, who was adamant about not killing Michael in H2O. Um, I think it was it's his bread and butter. Like, why, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, we tried
It,
that experiment with the bugs coming out of the mask and eating people's brains or whatever it did. Let's go back.
which was pretty cool. Stonehenge, right? Okay, we got a Stonehenge
Yes.
angle. Let's get Spinal
Yeah.
Tap in there, right? That something
Yeah.
like that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and to be fair, because sometimes cash grab sounds a little crass. Lucrative IP might be a
There
way of
you
putting
go.
it. Yeah,
That's absolutely right.
it's a lucrative IP, right? And
Yes.
that's what the brand is, right? How do we make money? How do we take a character that's got that cachet to it?
That's a great point because even to kind of reel back my analogy, it'd be like Star Wars Empire, and then be like, you know what? We don't need Darth Vader. Let's do Star Wars, but let's a new villain. No, he's your guy. He's your IP
Yeah.
villain. And Michael
Hmm.
certainly stands the test of time. For me, and I haven't done
Hmm.
the figures on this, Chad, so I don't know. But for me, even against Jason and Freddy and Ghostface and Texas Chainsaw, of all the kind of iconic horror villains, to me, Michael is the best. I don't know if that is box office true. I should look into that. I don't know. I don't know who kind of reigns supreme at the box office as far as horror villains, but I know he'd be up there.
Oh yeah. Well, and one of the big things is that unlike Freddy or Jason or even Leatherface, I mean, they've done some new Texas Chainsaws in recent years. The new three that they just did for
Yeah,
Halloween were all big box office draws.
big,
And so my
big.
guess is he would probably be at the top of that chart, if nothing
Yeah,
else, by virtue of the fact that they really have. I mean, they did one pretty decent Friday the 13th about 10, 12 years ago. That was, that was good. And then they had, and I mean, they did the Friday the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, but yeah,
right.
yeah, and but you're getting into something that's pretty fascinating there, because when you mention all those franchises and Halloween is sort of subjected to the same thing, you get into the fact that there was this string of just films, right? I think is the way to put it. So once again, you've got an IP, it works, but every IP iteration doesn't necessarily mean a quality movie. All right, sometimes you get those slasher
Yes,
films. They get into either like sort of the bizarre spectacle or cheap thrills, whatever it might be, right? And at least for me, Halloween descended into a lot of that. So like when you
it
get into like,
did.
yeah, four and five, were actually driven by very good performance by a very young Danielle Harris, who really
Yes,
started
she's
that.
amazing.
And unfortunately, it was just sort of overclouded by like just ridiculous teenagers and breasts and sex scenes and all of that sort of stuff, which does tie into how H2O was so different than that. But when you were going through and you're trying to plan a seventh Halloween film, were you watching all of these, and what was your takeaway from them as you're watching these?
Oh, absolutely. And I wasn't watching them because, well, one, before I got the job, but when I was up for the job, that's not when I watched them. I had watched them because I was a fan
Mm,
of the series. So I had already seen them all. And as a fan, and again, it's very difficult, Chad, because it's subjective. And,
sure.
the people, the creative forces from the writers to the directors, I mean, everybody involved, like you hate to disparage something that
Yeah.
they felt like was the best version of the film. So again, it's one person's point of view, but coming into it, I did feel like it kind of devolved into something uh, that wasn't tipping its hat to the original and what made the original work so well. There was very little nudity. There's very little grotesque, I just remember, I don't remember which Halloween it was where he squeezes somebody's head and it explodes in like a gush. That's not scary to me. It really is. It's just grotesque, or,
Yeah.
you know, I, the, I just think it became over the top. And and
Yeah.
and I understand how, because you are trying to top the last thing that you've done. Well, what can we do that's different? How can we make it more extreme? How we make this kill different than that last kill? And I can see where you kind of lose sight of story and emotion in favor of the visual, or hey, what we can do now that we couldn't do then, or what we have the money to do now that we didn't have the money to do then. But I always say, just
Hmm.
because you can do it doesn't mean you should. Like, this is how I
Hmm.
feel about CG right now. I'm like, you see these movies, you're like, well, none of this is real. Like, I don't have, as an audience member, I have no sense of danger for these people because it's all ridiculous. Like, they're doing things that aren't physically possible. Like, so I lose, when you knew, okay, I'm going to date myself, but the gray already does that. But like, when you knew, when you're watching Indiana Jones and Raiders or something, and that's a stunt guy that's
Hmm.
really going under the car. He's really jumping from that horse, or and there's no green screen and there's no CGI happening. There was a sense, or even the Mission Impossibles, right, where Tom Cruise performs these things himself. It's a totally different feeling as an audience member. Your adrenaline's going because you're like, oh my God, that's somebody really doing that. What if? What if? Even though it's going to be fine. So for me, the same thing with horror. The minute
Hmm.
it goes into the realm of ridiculousness,
Yeah.
like no one's going to squish someone's head like a watermelon. It's going to all I'm just not scared anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it did, and if we're talking story wise, going into the cult and the thorn, and I kind of, it became less realistic. And
Hmm.
so by the fact of it becoming less realistic, it became less frightening. Because there's a
Yeah.
certain point where I think as an audience member, you go, well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And now it's just jump scares and gross and, ew, rather
Yeah.
than I want to leave the theater. Well, I don't want, I mean, a good horror film to me, you leave the theater and you're looking over your shoulder when you're walking to the car, for this guy, you're like,
Hmm. Yeah. No, and I'm with you there. And and I know that probably most of those films have their cult followings, right? Especially
they do.
yeah, something like Curse of Michael Myers, the producer's cut, that's got a cult
Huge
following.
following.
Yeah, and that's cool, right? It there's nothing to bother. If just for me in watching the films, they go away from that sort of scary psychology as to what Michael Myers is. And the question that looms over it as to the nature of, is there a supernatural component to his existence? To where, like you said, now he's picking up grown people without problem, right? Throwing them across the room into a pit of lava, like whatever ridiculousness it is. And then, of course, and this, by the way, I have no issues with things like sexuality or nudity in films, but you can tell whenever they are fillers and patters
Yes.
because of a lack of story
Yes.
versus when there's actually an element of intimacy that drives the story. And that was all it was. It was a lot of, like, especially for 4 and 5, it was just like, hey, we're in a barn and half a dozen people have been cut to hell. What if we had sex right now, right? Like, just like on this bale of hay. What sense does that make, right? But we see some boobs, and so that's part of it.
Well, one of my favorite notes, meaning it wasn't, that I got on a first draft of Halloween 7 at the time. I think so. It might have been the first draft with Jamie Lee. I'm not sure, but one of the notes, and I've saved it, is more nubile young bodies. That was my note. I'm like, okay, so everything else working for you guys?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. This is all good, but where are the new body?
Yeah,
Did you
yeah.
actually did you have to work that in this? Jin, a nubile young body.
I did, which was a bit passive aggressive. But there was a scene that never made the final film where they were in. It was actually a pretty good scene. They were in a gymnasium locker room or something and taking showers, but there was steam filled, so you can kind of see. And then, of course, wiping away the fog, out of the fog comes Michael. But I tried to add a little bit there. I think that scene was added to address that note. But at least there's a
That's
reason. Okay, at least it made sense. We're after PE or whatever, and we're showering, and some had towels, some didn't.
so you
That was
tried. You
actually
tried.
pre Jamie Lee. I tried.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say others may not. Other may. I like the big boobs, right, or whatever it is. That's fine. I appreciate your efforts to try to classy it up just a little bit.
I try. I did what I
Yeah,
could.
yeah, especially as it sort of evolves. So they make that transition, and I'm sure John Carpenter, if he watched four or any of them afterwards, probably just went, "Oh God, what have they done to my baby?" And so it goes in this downward spiral. So let's pick up, and we might just as a heads up, audience, this is probably, I think we're going to go ahead and make this a two-parter, just so that we have plenty of time to discuss everything. But before we maybe cut and do a second part, let's talk a little bit about two faces of evil. All right, so
Yes.
H2O was not H2O when this all began. There was no Jamie Lee. There was none of that. What were you told when you were brought in to write Halloween 7?
Well, the short of it was I was so when you write a spec, so that's you write a script that no one's hired you to write, and you write it in order to hopefully get work. And so I wrote a spec X Files. That was the big television show on at the time. So it was a 1 hour spec X Files, and Richard Potter at Dimension Films read it, and it really liked it, and read some of my other stuff, and arranged a general meeting. So that's when your agent just sends you on a general meeting. You go, and they say, "These are the things we got in the pipeline. Are you interested in any of those?" So I went to that meeting, and Richard was very complimentary of the writing on the spec and some of the other specs I had written, and said, "We'd love to work with you. Right now, really the only opening we have is a direct to video film." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm thinking, I don't care where it is." Like I had written mostly sitcoms, Home Improvement being the first that I wanted to get into drama. I just gravitate more towards that. And he said, "Well, it's a direct to video. It's Halloween 7." Well, I don't care if nobody, I don't care if it's just for you to watch at home as a home movie. Like, yeah. So I said, "Okay, well, we have like 3 or 4 writers going in and pitching to Mustafa Akkad, Trancas International. So come up with your take, and we'll set up a meeting to go pitch." So that's how that initiated. So for me, it was just direct to video, Halloween 7, coming with an idea.
Out of curiosity, because again, I came onto it a little bit later. So Curse of Michael Myers was what, around 95, 94, something like that?
Yes, because this was in 96 that I had this meeting.
Yeah.
96, 97.
Was that one straight to film, or did that one actually
No,
make it
that
to theaters?
that made it to the theaters.
Wow.
Yes,
Well, and that really tells you something, right?
it
About where the
does.
franchise was. Like, hey, can you do a straight to movie Halloween? Like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, straight to video.
Yeah.
Yeah. So which, it's not in like today's times where that's fine. Like you stream,
Yeah.
that's done all the time. At the time, it was like, oh, gee, yeah, how far have we fallen? If you were a
Yeah.
direct to video, it was kind of a shame,
Yeah.
a
And
badge of dishonor.
yeah. So for you youngins out there who don't remember videos, so back in the day before we had all of the instant streaming, we actually had to go to places to get videos. And so straight to video, I mean, even lay people like myself, we knew that was a death knell, right? This thing didn't even get to a theater, and now it's just a straight to video. You knew it was bad. So the fact
Yes.
that that was a straight to video production, I mean, that says a lot. But I've read the screenplay. You didn't treat it like it was a straight to video. You treated it with respect.
I was Chad. I was so excited as a fan. One, as the opportunity, yes, from a writing point of view, because it would be my first feature credit, even if it was direct to video, something outside of the comedy genre, which I had done for at that point 4 years. But what trumped all that was the fact that it was a franchise I loved, that I thought
Mm-hmm.
did go off the rails to some degree, and that I could have the chance to kind of make the film I wanted to make with Michael Myers. I mean, I get excited about it. I'm talking about it
Yeah.
now. This is 30 years later. Yeah.
Yeah. When I love it. I actually love seeing the excitement and the passion in your face about talking about it. You can tell it's a very fond memory and something that you
Oh,
really loved doing.
I did. I did. It
Yeah,
wasn't easy. There were
yeah,
points in the journey, but isn't that with
yeah.
anything, right? It's the
Absolutely.
hero's
Oh,
journey.
the hero's journey. Very
Yes,
good.
the
Absolutely.
writer's journey.
All right. So to wrap up part one here, let's talk about Two Faces of Evil, because this is before there's H2O, before there's even a Jamie Lee involved. This is
Correct.
you're in your 20s, you're trying to make your way, you get this opportunity. How did you approach Halloween 7, which I believe was originally entitled Two Faces of Evil?
It was. It was.
Okay.
Well, so the challenge there was you don't have Jamie Lee, you don't have any more siblings. They weren't going to bring, so how do you make this interesting? And in the 80s and 90s, it's interesting because in thinking about our discussion today, Chad, I realized there aren't, this is a good thing, but there aren't the kind of rotation of serial killers that we had in the 80s and maybe the 90s. There was always a serial killer in the news. Like it was the Night Stalker and this person, the Boston Strangler in the 70s. There was always this kind of, I remember as a kid, it would scare the hell out of me. Like this Night Strangler would come in your house at night and strangle. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is you'd have these copycats who would come along and these were their idols. And so they would stop doing copycat murders.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. But Michael's been around long enough. He's done enough killing. He's been in the news enough that I'd imagine there's somebody out there who kind of idolizes him and maybe would want to kind of start uh, emulating him or carrying on his legacy. And so that was kind of it gave me somewhere to go that wasn't the cult, wasn't the thorn, it wasn't supernatural on the head supernatural, because I do think there is a supernatural element to Michael. But it gave me a direction to go where it's like, okay, I can see that. I can see where that opens things up for me. And then the idea was, okay, well, that's an interesting kind of B story that I could weave into the A story. Now, where's the setting? We've done Haddonfield. We've done, what could be something different? And that's where the idea of the Hillcrest Academy came up, the all girls school. It was all girls at the time. So that was kind of again, this is 30 years ago, but I think that was, and I thought that's something I can come in if 4 other writers or 5 other writers are coming in and pitching to Mustafa. You're also trying to think as a writer, well, how do I come in with something that I'm pretty sure no one else is going to come in with, but
Mm-hmm.
isn't so far afield that they're going to look at you like you're nuts. I knew
Yeah.
someone would probably pick up from the point of view of the thorn. I thought someone's going to take that. Someone's going to come up with somebody, this and that. And I thought, well, again, going back to what's rooted in reality
Mm-hmm.
versus kind of going kind of out there story wise. Well, what was in the news is a lot of these serial killers and copycats, and what if we take it more in the realistic arena and focus it on that kind of story? And Silence of the
And
Lambs, sorry, Silence of the Lambs was a big film, which of course you had Hannibal Lecter, and he kind of helped lead the
mm-hmm.
detective James,
Clarice.
Clarice to the killer. So it was kind of taking elements of that and bringing it to the story.
Yeah, and I think you can definitely see that influence, because you have your sort of your Myers groupie, the magician, I believe he is. He's a
He
magician.
was, yes, a
Yeah,
clown magician.
yeah, or an illusionist, right? So, or however you want to,
Yes,
if you want to
yes,
go Arrested Development on it. But so sort of a John Wayne Gacy, and actually almost kind of comes across like a prototype of the character that Ethan Hawke would later play in Black Phone. I thought I kind of saw some of that kind of stood out
yes,
to me.
yes. Again with the mask
Yeah, right.
too. He has
There's that, and so, but he's approaching this as like there's a psychosexual dynamic to Michael Myers killing, right? And so
right.
it kind of gets out of just the whole oh, I've just got to kill my bloodline, to something more along the lines of there's an actual criminological psychology to
Correct.
what it is, which once again, right, that's a huge shift in the 90s when you're writing this
Yes.
from where the series was, because by the time that Curse of Michael Myers comes out, and this really comes out in the producer's cut, they had basically lost Danielle Harris, because the script they
Right.
give her is that, oh, by the way, you're now pregnant with your uncle's baby. right? That's
Right.
what happens in
Yeah.
in Curse of Michael Myers. The producer's cut is where we're giving you an incestuous evil baby that is yours, and and so forth. And so Danielle Harris is like, well, see you later, and good for her. I think
Yeah.
kind of a devolution there. But so you really take a nice turn on this, and you try to revamp it. How did you find, was there any difficulty or pushback on that given where the franchise was, or was it just received well?
It was received well, which I was really excited about when my first meeting. So I went in and I pitched that take, and Mustafa was great. Paul Freeman, who was the producer, was there, and I believe Malik, who was at the time in college at USC,
Hmm.
was there. Um, and they were, when you pitch an idea, and I've had all these experiences. Sometimes you get people who give you nothing, studio executives, producers who they could love it. You find out later from your agent, but they give you nothing in the room.
Hmm.
Or you get people who do this, with their, we didn't have cell phones, but whatever it is. What? So what? And on the opposite end, you get people who are like, oh, nodding or engaging or smiling or, oh, and they were a much more receptive audience, which helps
Mm-hmm.
so much when you're pitched because you're nervous.
Sure.
I've been doing it 30 years. You're nervous every time. You don't know how your idea is going to be received. So they were very gracious in the room. But I've learned they can be gracious in the room and you still get passed on. They're just trying to be kind and give you something. But I found out maybe a week later that they're going with you. It's your idea. Oh my gosh, Chad, that's one of the
Well,
highlights. Ooh, let's go. So going into the first meeting after that and discussing, expecting changes, and they did. They had their thoughts on it, but no, there was no pushback on kind of taking it in that direction and kind of grounding it a little more in reality. I think they had seen that, again, we've run out of the sibling approach. They didn't want to go down the Thorn approach. So they wanted something different. So I think it allowed them to pivot in a way that still was true to the character, give it a
mhm.
little freshness. And the 90s was a time of kind of grounding thing. You had Seven, you had Silence of the Lambs. We weren't going to be that, but we could kind of lean more in that direction rather than kind of the more crazy, just blood for blood's sakes. He's Genghis Khan out there.
Yeah, well, it's probably a good move to go away from Haddonfield because he had killed everybody in Haddonfield by that point, right? So
There was no one left.
through six films, everyone was dead. Haddonfield was a wasteland, so you had to move away. Now, audience, we're going to wrap part one here because starting in part two, the great plot twist comes, and Robert discovers that Two Faces of Evil is not going to get made because a pretty amazing thing is about to happen in his journey in Halloween. So, thank you so much for joining us on the Bible Search and Rescue podcast. Please turn into part two. And until that one comes out, go out and make the world a better place. Thank you to Robert for being here with us, and you all have a lovely day.